Hello, today I'm going to show you how to send and receive data with a Firebase backend in React Native. This is the React Native Firebase library here for React Native. You just do npm install save React Native Firebase. It walks you through the process here, and for iOS, in our case here, you have to actually add some lines to your iOS project. If you have any questions about this stuff, please write a comment and I will try to walk you through it. It's pretty straightforward, but there are some errors that you might get. One thing to keep in mind is that you might not want to use your pod file for this. I had some issues with that. The best thing to do is just install it the way that it says in the docs here and do React Native link. So do not forget that step. So let's go back to the code here. So I created a test app here without the actual integration for Firebase. We have our Firebase project here with React Native elements. I'm just using this project for a couple UI components. That requires React Native vector icons. So anyways, this food list, let's walk through this real quick. We have our imports here. We have our food list component. I created an array of colors as just one extra field that we can add to our backend. We'll talk about that in a minute. So we have our food list here that holds our list of food items, and we have our current food item, which is the food item as the user types. We're going to actually store that in the state. So we have our onFoodAdded function here to log our food that we get back from Firebase. We'll talk about this in a minute too. And we have our onFoodsReceived, which is a callback to let us know when we have received our list of foods from the Firebase backend. So when we receive our food list, we're going to save that food list in the state object called food list. And then we have our component did mount function here, which we'll get to in a second. And our render function returns a safe area view, which is necessary for iOS if you don't want your components to take up or to overlay the top part of the screen here. If I take this out, then these components here will actually go on top of the gray bar here, which is not what we want. So then we have our view for our add food text input and our submit button here. We have a style for that. So we have our text input, which holds our current food item. And on change text, we say set the state of the food item as we change it, or as the user types, I mean. And we have a button to submit. We'll add something to this onPress in a minute. And we have a flat list, which holds our list of food items here. And our item separator will be a divider, which comes from the React Native elements library here. And we have a list item for each of our foods in our list. We're going to have a name parameter and a color parameter here. So it'll be the food name and the food color. So that's all we're going to store in the backend. We're going to keep this pretty simple for this video. So let's go to our Firebase console here. I already set this up. We have a console project called Coding with Curry, and I created a collection called Foods. If you don't know the terms in Firebase, I'm not going to go through those now, but it'll be good to look up that yourself online. There's basically a collection. A collection is full of documents, and each document is full of different fields that you can add. That's basically the backend setup for Firebase. We have nothing in here now except for this collection of foods. So if we go back to our app here, we're going to create a new folder called API. I do this a lot for my projects that require a backend. And I'm going to create a new file called foodsapi.js. And this file will only contain our functions that we are using to call Firebase. So all of our Firebase related code will be in here. And the reason why I'm doing this is because if we ever want to change from Firebase to a different backend, then I want a way for us to only change our code in one place. And for the data that we get back to our food list file here, I want this file to not have to change if I change the backend. And we'll talk about how that is possible in a second. So in our Foods API class, We're going to import Firebase from our React Native Firebase library that we set up already. And we're going to have two functions here that we're going to actually export and import into our food list. So we're going to say export function, and we're going to call this one add food. So we want to send everything to this function that we need for our Firebase backend to actually add a new food item. So we're going to have a object here called food, and we're going to have a callback that gets called when the actual transaction is complete. So we're going to just call this add complete, and our next step here is to actually call the Firebase method to add something. So the syntax for that in this case would be firebase.firestore. So firestore gives us our firestore object, which is our database. And then we want to call .collection. So we're going to specify which collection we want in this case. Let's put this on a different line here. In our collection, we called foods. Make sure that these names are correct or your data won't get returned or pushed correctly. So .collection, and then we do .add. So .add is how you would add a new object. So .add, and then we need to actually send it an object. So there's different ways to do this, to set this up in your app. We're not going to actually create a separate class for our food. We're just going to pass it as the object here. So we're going to assume that food has the correct fields already. If you're actually making a business app, you might want to put in a lot of precautions, or you might want to use TypeScript to actually make sure that this data is what you want it to be or what you expect it to be. So for our add, we're going to have a field in our backend called name, and that name is going to refer to food.name. So the object food will contain a name field. So next we have a color field in our backend, and we're going to call that, and we're going to get that from food.color. And next, I wanted to create a way for the backend to store the time at which we have added this to the backend. There's a certain way to do this, and it's not very obvious, but I'll show you how to do it here. So the field will be called created at. We're going to use the Firebase object, firebase.firestore, and then there's a field in here called field value. And then in the field of value, we need to do, there's something called a server timestamp. And that actually gets the server timestamp from the server, and it stores it in this field here. So we have this, and then we need to do a then, and then we get back our data here. So what do we do when we get back our data? What do we want to do with that data? In this case, we're not actually going to do a lot with it, but we're just going to send it to the add complete function here. You don't really need to do this, but you might want to know when your data is actually complete in your app. So like you might want to have a pop-up saying that it was added or something like that. So we have our callback here, and then if we want to, we can do .catch and error, and then we can do something like console.log and log our error here. Let's get rid of that. Okay, so we have that finished. So let's do another function called export function get foods. So in this function, all we want to do is have a callback when we finish. So let's do foods retrieved. We want to get our list of foods that we have stored in our app. There's a few different ways to do this. So in this function, I'm going to use the async await pattern just to be a little bit different and show you how it is in case you forgot. I talked about this in my previous video on networking. So async should go here, export async, and then I'm going to do var data, This will be the data that we get back from await.firestore. Actually, let's call this a snapshot. You'll see why in a second. Await.firebase.firestore. And then we do .collection. Oops, you do not want to do that, sorry. .collection, and then we call the same foods collection here. I want to have these in order. So when you add new information to your Firebase backend, there's no actual way to make sure that it gets added in a certain order, unless you're doing like an array or something. So in our case, we want to get all of our stuff back in a certain order. So we're going to do order by, and we're going to order by the field created at. So this says retrieve all the items, but keep them in order. And then we do .get. Get gives us our snapshot. So if you look at the notes here, it says that it returns a query snapshot. So that's why I named this snapshot. So what do you want to do with the snapshot? So after we retrieve our list here, oops, I had an extra O there. So after we retrieve our list here, we do snapshot dot for each. And then we get back a document. So I'm just going to call this doc. And what do we do with this doc each time? So I mentioned earlier that we want to have all of our Firebase related code in here. That will include things like document snapshots and query snapshots. I want this function to send us back a list of food items. But what we get back from our Firebase call here is we get back a list of snapshots. So we want to convert that to a list of just standard objects. So we're going to create a new variable here. We're going to call this food list. That'll just be an empty array. I like having an empty array here versus null because we don't have to check to see if something is null, because this will never be null. So for each loop here, we're going to push the new item to our food list. So food list.push. Push is how you add new values to an array. And to get our data from our document, we do doc.data, and that'll retrieve our data. So what do we do after this? So after we have our array, so this will be done synchronously, so we don't need to put an await here or anything. And then we do foods received. So we're calling our callback here, and we add our food list to this callback, and we're done. That's it. That's all you need to do for retrieving and adding your foods. So how do we actually implement this stuff in our food list? So let's add our imports here. For our foods API, these are named imports, so we need to actually specify them with brackets here. We'll do that in a second. And from our API.foods API. So for the first one is named add food, and the second one is named get foods. So we have our functions here. Let's do get foods first. So we want to get the foods when our component first mounts. So we only want to do that one time. You can change that depending on your app. You might want to load it every time you go back to the component, which I don't really recommend. Or you can have like a refresh button or pull to refresh, and this will get called again. We'll do get foods, and we'll pass our onFoodsReceived callback to this. And as you have seen, we should get a list of foods here. So that's all we need to do to actually retrieve our food list. The food list will come in here, we'll set it to the state, and we'll pass that food list to our flat list. So we'll get to that in a second. So now we need a way to add our foods to the list. So we have our button here to submit. Let's put our information in here that we need. I'm actually going to get rid of this bracket here because we don't really need it. I'm going to call add food. And in here, we're going to put our food object here based on our current food item. So as you can see, our current food item is actually only our name of the food. And we'll get to the color in a second. So we're storing the name in the current food item, not the actual entire food object itself. I'm just doing that for tutorial purposes. Normally you would have like a form or something that the user would fill out with the name, the color, the taste, or whatever you want. So back to our add food here. We are going to have the name here, and we're going to get the name from the current food item state. So we're going to do this dot state dot current food item, and that'll just be the name of the food. So here's where we use the color array at. So for color, for this video, I just want to have a random selection of colors that we want to put with our food. So how do we access a random string in this array? So for that, we use the math class, which lets us pick a random number. And here's how you would do that for this case. So you would say this dot colors. So this dot colors is this array here. It's in the component, so you need to use this keyword. And then you would have a math class. So we have a few different things here. We want to use floor in this case because we don't want it to round up. And then we want to do math.random. And random is a function, so we need to do parentheses. And then we want to have a limit on the random number up until the length of the color field. So it'll be this dot colors dot length. So it'll be from 0 to the length of this array here. So we're passing in an object and we're passing in a callback. So we need to add our callback to here. So we do this dot on food added. Yep, forgot the comma here. So let's check this real quick. I want to check something up here. Oh yeah, we want to do this dot on foods received here. Don't forget this keyword if you're in a component. That's a very common mistake that people make. So I think that's it for our add food here. We have add food, we have retrieve foods. So let's run this and see what happens when we run. Okay, so as you can see, nothing has changed, and that is because we have no foods in our backend. Let's open our debugger here just to see what we're actually receiving and sending. Let's do inspect, do console. So as you can see, food list 30, we have an empty array. So let's go back to our project here. So 30, our on foods received callback worked, and we were able to log our food list, which is an empty string. So let's add a new food. Let's call this steak and submit. So as you can see, it did not pop up in our list here. So let's figure out why that did not happen. Let's go back to our log here. We have food added, so our food was added. Let's go to our console. We have our food here. Oops. Let's see what's in our food. We have steak. We have a random color, which is yellow, and we have our created at timestamp. So our add food function worked fine with Firebase. Let's figure out why we don't see our object in the list. So we're setting the food list here. Let's go back to our console again. As you can see, our food list was not populated with our new food. So on foods received, let's go back to our API here, get foods. We're calling this, so let's do console.log and log our food list here, just to be sure that we're that this is working correctly. Okay, run. Okay, so it worked this time. So something happened. I'm not really sure what happened. I think we just had to restart the app again. So yeah, as you can see, we have steak yellow. So let's try to add a new food and see if that happens right away. So let's do pizza. Submit. Let's see what this document reference 26. Okay, so I figured out what the issue was. I forgot to add the state to onFoodEdit, or I forgot to set the state in onFoodEdit. So let's go back here to the API class, or the API file, where we're adding the food at. I actually don't want to do this because this returns a document snapshot. This is not the actual data that we want yet. We have to add an extra step in here, unfortunately. So we need to do, let's call this snapshot, and we'll do snapshot.get. Get is how we actually get the result from that, but that's not our data yet. So .get, and then we need to do another then. So then will be our actual food data. So let's put this in parentheses, do this, and for this section, this is where we actually get our, let's put this here. This is where we get our actual data at. Oops, yep. So we need to do food data dot, I think it's data and then parentheses. So this is something that you have to get used to when you're using React Native Firebase. So this should be our actual data. So let's save this and we'll see what we have in our food log here. So let's reload. Let's do pizza. So we have no errors. Let's go back to our log. No, we don't have anything here yet. Let's try that again. Okay, sorry. I forgot to add the actual function callback in here again. So let's do add complete. Now we should see it. Let's reload this. We should see our new pizzas in here. So let's add pie in here. So submit, and then we'll go here. And as you can see, we have our food object here with our name pie, created at timestamp, and color is orange in our case. So let's go back to our code here. And now that we know that this is working correctly now, let's go back to the onFoodEdit. And now we want to update the actual state of the screen so we can see our object being added in our list. So we want to set the state of our food list. So let's just copy and paste this for now. So we're going to set our food state based on our food item. So we want to add our new food item to our food list. So there's a way to do that easily in React Native, actually in JavaScript. So we'll use a spread operator. So we're going to say previous state, so previous state food list. What this does is this gets the food list as it is now, and it appends whatever you put after it into the list. So food. So that's actually all we need to do to set the food list with our new food. So let's save this. We'll go back here and we'll, let's reload this. And now we'll put in bread and see what happens. And now we see that our bread and our color black is in the list now. So yeah, that completes this tutorial on how to actually send data to your Firebase backend and retrieve data from your Firebase backend. So after you add it, we query that data back and it gets added to the list. So it's not quite real-time transactions, but we'll get into that in another video. So I hope this helps you get started with Firebase, and there's a lot more to learn with Firebase. So if you can get this far with it, the rest will seem pretty easy. So it's just learning the syntax really. So I hope this helps you, and see you next time on Coding with Curry. Bye.